Thinking about this, I came across a couple of stories I could have told. Um, my brothers and I often got into situations that were less than ideal. Some of them just funny, others were mischievous, and there were a couple of occasions that pretty close to being unlawful. But I more I thought about it, my brothers and I didn't have to ever say to each other, "Don't tell mom." That was a given. We had a pact between us that we never told. No matter what kind of trouble we were getting in, we kept it to ourselves. But there was another phrase that's very close to "don't tell mom" that I remembered hearing a lot in my life. I heard it from mostly men, mostly men that were men I should have been able to trust, family members, my stepfather, friends of my mother. And that created a secret in my life, a secret that I couldn't tell. And I began to realize that my family had a lot of secrets, those generational secrets, secrets that go back a long time and that nobody talks about unless it's in whispers when they don't think the children are around. Well, as a child, you know that if you're really quiet and you're really still, adults seem to forget you're in the area and they talk without them knowing you're there. And I heard the story about how my grandfather got fired from a job when he worked in an elementary school, and the family had to move soon afterwards. And I heard the story about what my grandfather had done to my grandmother just a week before she passed. And I heard one of my aunts say, "Well, he was just an old goat," and they all started laughing. But by that point in time, I wasn't laughing. There were tears rolling down my face because I knew that I was one of those keeper of secrets that I didn't tell, and I never told anyone. I remember my grandfather whispering in my ear as he pulled me up on his lap on a Sunday afternoon when we visited, "Don't tell your mother." And I knew what was going to happen. He would put my hand down his pants and let me play with his toy. Or he would take me to the basement and we were getting peaches or applesauce that my grandmother had canned for dinner. And he would whisper in my ear, "Don't tell your mother." And I didn't. And it happened that those stories, those secrets that we were telling or not telling influence your life and influences your family, and they are generational. They go on and on and on unless something stops. Well, I didn't tell my story until one day after my grandfather died. And all of the family was in the church, and the preacher was up front talking about how wonderful my grandfather was, how he was such a good Christian man. And at over 100 years of age, he'd given his life for his community, and the fantastic things he had done, and the legacy that he was leaving to the community with his over 100 children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And I was sitting there, and I knew the true legacy he was leaving in our community. And I sat, and I couldn't sit anymore. I couldn't take it. And for the first time in my life, I stood up, and I literally stood up, and I shouted in that church, "This is bullshit. Everything that's being said here is bullshit, and you all know it." And as I slipped out of the pew, you could have heard a pin drop. And as I'm going back the aisle on my way out of church, I began to hear noises. I heard a couple of amens, and I heard a couple of people clap. And as I got out the door and down the steps, I realized I wasn't the only one that had walked out of the church that day. There stood my brother with his arms around me, and an aunt and a cousin, and they supported me, and they supported what I had to do that day. What disappointed me most, my mother didn't come out. My mother did not join me. And on the way home, my mother chastised me. "You embarrassed me in there. You had no right to say that. That wasn't the time nor the place. You need to learn to show some respect. You know what? I did show respect that day, self-respect, for maybe the first time in my life. And I want everyone to know that if someone ever tells you, tell your children, tell your grandchildren, if anyone ever says, don't tell your mother, that means to run immediately to your mother and tell her, or your father, or your neighbor that you trust, or your teacher, and tell them. And if they don't listen, stand up and shout from the rooftop, this is bullshit, and I'm not going to let it happen to me anymore.